All righty. So moving on to our next item on the agenda is our fall in-seat preparation, our planning, timelines and such. And I will say this has been a process, well, actually it's quite a number of processes to make all gel and come to fruition that we've been working on as an administrative and a staff team and families as well over the course of the past couple of months. In preparing for getting to in-seat, it has been a conversation piece really since we made the decision back in August to go to remote teaching. You know, we knew at that point in time, the Board of Education had approved a motion to start the school year in remote for everyone until the first 10 weeks of the school year. Well, the first 10 weeks of the school year is upon us at the beginning of November. So obviously we've been having conversations since that point in preparation for what that transition will look like come November. And you know, putting together the plans from a student perspective and from a staffing perspective, both of which processes working in tandem with one another are mammoth and involve, as you can imagine, a ton of variables. Because in a sense, we are recreating every little aspect of the district and doing that at the time that we're also teaching remote. So to say that it has been an arduous task has been an understatement. And so the plans that we are going to discuss, roll out this evening are what is going to be proposed in moving forward as we reach that endpoint of that 10-week period that the board had decided we would go for that remote learning. There is, again, we're going to roll out that information tonight. There's also going to be further conversation, discussion, some rollouts next Monday night as well. We have a special board meeting for 7 o'clock next Monday on October 12th. We are asking at that meeting on the 12th that you entertain a motion for the proposal. So we will not be entertaining tonight any type of a motion for a proposal. Tonight is simply for presentation purposes and for digestion purposes of information. And you know, the board certainly, as we look at decision making moving forward, you know, as we discussed tonight and subsequently, you know, there's certainly you know, the board will consider all the variables that, you know, we are looking at in terms of offering the in-seat instruction to those who want it. And then as well as the schedule. And then the board has the liberty, obviously, to make the decision to move forward via that proposal or to amend that proposal or to delay that proposal. I mean, really, it's we're just supplying the information by which the board can then receive feedback, chew on, and ultimately make a decision as we move forward. We did distribute, families and staff both received surveys for commitments to that regard this past Friday, and those have been distributed so that we have ample time. So should the board decide that they will go with the proposal unamended as presented, this gives us the lead time necessary to pull together the proper staffing model to accommodate the students that want in-seat and the students that want to remain remote. So we are, as we said all along, we would be offering that opportunity to families should they want to stay remote. We will offer that opportunity to do so. And those that want to return in-seat, we would have that ability as well. So with that, comes, complications in that we also have promised that, unlike other districts that are also in their plannings of going back in seat, we are wanting to make sure that either realm, the in-seat and the remote, are taught by an Avondale teacher. And so that requires us to go through a whole different staffing situation than some of the districts around us are. We're not outsourcing the folks that want to stay remote to a company or some third-party platform, as some districts are. We want to keep that quality of education with our own staff. And so we are choosing to go this extra step in our proposal to accommodate students with an Avondale teacher. We are also, as a solution goes, the major solution we have is that the remote, the students that wish to stay remote will be taught in a class that is of other remote students, so that again, that quality maintains the same. And again, I will compare to districts around us, i.e. on our borders, who are choosing to go a different route and an easier route, where students are just streaming into a classroom via Zoom and being a participant electronically into the instruction, which really, to me, is not a sustainable model, and certainly is not one conducive to quality instruction. And I believe our teachers would echo that as well. There will be some situations by which we have singleton classes, primarily at the secondary level, like high school, where I only have one teacher with a certain certification that can teach a certain class, where that streaming solution may be the only solution for those that want to be participants remotely. But outside of that, our major solution in the district is to keep students remote, in a class of remote, taught by an Avondale teacher. And while some folks may think, well, that's easy peasy, it really isn't, because we have a finite number of staff and we have to allocate students per that staff. So when we ask for those commitment surveys, we need you to return them so that we can staff up appropriately to what the needs and the demands are from our community. So it is imperative that families fill out those surveys and return them. I've had questions from families about, why do we have to make a commitment for the remainder of the year because of COVID being so fluid. And I will say that, we know that none of us have a crystal ball to know what the rest of the year looks like from, a COVID perspective. And we certainly will have the flexibility that, should we need to all go back remote again as an entire district because of increasing cases that necessitate that to be, then we will. If we have students who are in need of becoming quarantined because they may come down with COVID or be near someone who has COVID, those students will still be able to continue their instruction, but they'll continue their instruction remotely while they are quarantined. What's difficult for us is for people to just come and go as they please. We can't have a system where people want to be remote one week and they want to be in seat the next week, and, well, it's convenient for me to be this week. We don't have a staffing model that will accommodate that type of scheduling. And I don't think that we can, or that our families would appreciate us having to reschedule every 3 or 4 weeks, where students will have a new teacher every 3 or 4 weeks to accommodate people coming back and forth between remote and seated. So we would be entertaining, if folks need to move from remote to in-seat, we would look at those on a case-by-case basis and honor those according to what numbers we have available to make that transition without affecting staffing. But just to have it open-ended and have people willy-nilly decide one week which way they want to go, no. And that instructionally is bad for students to have that degree of inconsistency. So we are asking families to make a commitment understanding that there is flexibility in that commitment. But we have to have a place to start so that we can schedule and staff up appropriately for the demand that's out there. So that's just a caveat that I'm putting out there up front, that, while that seems to be a big ask, folks need to understand that with our staffing, we have a limited number of staff. And so in order to accommodate that, we need to make sure that we are staffed up appropriately to meet both ends of those who want to continue remote and those that want to come back in seat. We also are upfront about the fact that come November, it may be that there is a change in placement because of that. Because we're trying to accommodate all wants and wishes, frankly, there's going to be some cases where your child may not have the same teacher they started the school year with. We'd love to be able to say we could, and we're going to work in every way we can to keep things as consistent as they have been with your current placement. But I just know that there will be cases where we will have to reassign students to new teachers to accommodate everybody who wants one or the other. So, so again, as we try to meet everybody's needs, everybody may have to take a little sacrifice, and that is getting a new placement of a teacher in November to make that happen. So that's the downside. We're hoping that that is minimal, but I do foresee that will be something that will have to happen. So as we look at the, when we decided to go remote in August, we had a number of variables that were feeding into that decision making. So we had at that time a very inconsistent set of executive orders that were coming out that conflicted with how, frankly, we were to conduct instruction. And at that time, we did not have Oakland County health protocols in place. Those weren't given to school districts yet from the health department. There was a lot of unknowns at the time. The governor was threatening to pull us all back into phase 3, which would be everybody's on remote. So there were a lot of unknowns, a lot of inconsistencies. And frankly, when we looked at the survey data in August, a lot of lack of confidence in sending children to school via our constituency as well as our staff. So the board, as most districts did in our county, decided to play it safe and take time out this fall, go remote, and subsequently wait for further guidance to arise from the health department and other venues to help further prepare us to having students in seat. So we have received clear Oakland County guidance in terms of specific protocols now for schools. We've received specific guidance on how to set up classrooms. In fact, we've had walkthroughs with our nurses from the health department. We've had certainly all of our protocols examined, everything from food service to transportation to what it looks like in terms of transitions within buildings. There's been time now for that to be analyzed. So the environment that we're sitting in right now from a preparation standpoint is much, much greater than where we were sitting at the beginning of August. So a lot of the unknowns, a lot of the blanks that we didn't have filled in at the beginning of August, we now do. So, from that level of accommodating social distancing, from the level of, how do we set up our classrooms? How do we do instruction? What does the day look like? We now have clear guidance, and we've got protocols and plans in place to accommodate that. From a survey standpoint, I guess let's jump there for a moment. So Julie, if you can put the surveys up, and Mary Ann, I'm going to kind of have you kind of address the perception surveys that we distributed to families. This was a couple of weeks ago when we were just putting our toe in the pool to get a sense of where our families are sitting with the in-seat versus the remote, kind of just seeing, not a commitment, but just kind of seeing where they were at. And so this will summarize what we're gleaning from those surveys.
Good evening. I hope you're doing well. This was our summary for our family wellness check, and you'll also see a summary for our staff wellness check. This survey window was open for about 2 weeks, September 21st to October 2nd. It closed at 3 p.m. on Friday. So we were able to calculate some of the detailed responses. There were 673 family responses, which reflects 866 students within those responses. This is a fairly lower response rate compared to our August survey. Remember that our wellness check is an item that we are aligned to highly recommended standards from the county to make sure that we are checking on all stakeholders during a time of remote learning. So this was our first avenue to connect with parents, to represent their family, then staff, and then we have a student-aligned wellness check that we are collaborating on both for classroom use, but also with another district improvement team committee. Go ahead, Julie. Yep. So this is just briefly, again, remember we saw 673 responses total. One person did not respond to this question. All the questions were optional on the wellness check survey. We only obtained demographic information for people who wanted a follow-up call. So of the 672 responses that were received as of Friday, these percentages reflect the total representation of the question or answer to how do you feel about the possibility of returning to in-person education in November. In just a few slides, you'll see an itemized list by level or learning level as well. The wellness check included checking in on COVID-19 symptoms or health needs, loss of a family member or dealing with grief, also mental health, which is that next slide you'll see, and access to food or nutritional supports. So collectively, these are the itemized results by level from our families. You'll see there was a total of 866 students that are reflected within the answers. 335 of them reflect elementary, and I know you guys can read across and see those totals on that top line for responses. Can I get a thumbs up if you're with me? Awesome. So the itemized responses have been broken down into the are you ready, are you unsure, or are you not ready? You'll see the numerical value of responses that reflect students and then the percentage of that level. For example, 145 elementary students were reflected in the family response saying that they were ready. That calculates to 43.2% of all the elementary responses. If you read across, we have GATE, middle school, high school, and then our specialty programs. In our specialty programs, this would include things like early learning center, early childhood special education, early intervention, or post-high programs. So these are the family responses that I'll let you just kind of take in for a moment.
So we know that, while you're digesting these numbers, we know that, so you've got the unsure category, in the unsure category, if you were to split that in half and say, okay, well, half of that unsure category is going remote and half that unsure category is going in seat, you're looking at about a 60-40 in seat versus remote. And I think that's probably, from the indications that we're seeing, just in terms of what feedback we're all getting from families outside of this survey, I'll say it's trending about 60-40 that people want in-seat versus remote. So a little bit different in the confidence level of where we were in August.
Another thing to consider to supplement what Dr. Schwartz is sharing is that the itemized comments that parents or staff were able to share could drive some of the resources that we were able to share with the commitment survey. For example, a day in the life packet, walking through safety protocols, classrooms, steps. Many of those materials came out of collective town halls, board meeting, the return to learn plan, but really we looked at survey responses of questions that people had. They are families that maybe they couldn't attend all of the virtual meetings, or perhaps haven't been able to look at the return to learn plan on the website. So we created supplemental guides for families. On the next couple of slides, this is what I think is critical for you. I know that everyone wants to know about enrollment, but the real objective in our wellness check was to figure out how we could support our community with COVID-19, mental health, food, and safety. So 7 of our families have reported that they need assistance with COVID-19 resources or supports. Our family school liaison team is following up with an additional 42 families who are currently experiencing grief or loss and asked for resources to aid them during this time. Additionally, 44 of our families reported that 1 or more of their children or household members need support with social, emotional, mental health needs. So currently we are connecting resources. And this area is very sensitive. I'd like to mention that our family school liaison team has connected with community resources or tools from our Oakland County toolkit. And then when the families are ready, we will then connect families either with the school counselor, social worker, if they have an existing relationship, or our Avondale youth assistants that you heard earlier today. Currently, these were families that chose to respond and then chose to give their demographic information because they are wanting follow-up. We're keeping their information confidential until they're ready to partner with their school-based team. Lastly, you'll see on the food and nutrition, there was a huge learning opportunity here. We have 76 families that we're partnering with. The reason why that number is a little bit higher is we learned right away from feedback that we have families who were unable to access the food distribution times for pickup, the meetup and pickup food because they're during remote learning and parents were unable to leave home so their child could continue learning. They chose not to come and get the food. So effective tonight, with the support of Evan Manning and Annette McAvoy, we were able to start an evening meet up and eat up at Deerfield for families to be able to get an evening option to pick up that food. Next, we have our summary of our Avondale staff wellness check-in. These are the same dates for this. We had 162 staff responses. And just some summary information, that overall question about how do you feel about the possibility of returning to in-person education in November. So I'll let you look at those percentages for a moment. And then you'll see I also have an itemized report for you. So of the responses, same format that you saw with the families. Thumbs up if you can see that chart. Thank you so much. But again, this is responses by level. The only difference here is with specialty programs, this also includes any central office staff that reported back on the wellness check. And again, it's the ready, unsure, or not ready per level. So it's our aim to be able to do a wellness check periodically, especially while we go through remote learning, but also changes due to COVID. Future wellness checks won't include enrollment possibilities, but it was critical at this time that the team included those questions to aid the school board and school district in understanding where the community was at. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So this provides us kind of an introspective on kind of what the perceptions are, of community, of staff. From a community perspective, that 60-40 marker of in-seat versus remote is a similar statistic that we're also seeing in the results in Troy and in Rochester. Troy started back today with their early elementary going back, and then they're on a trajectory of infusing students in through mid-October. Rochester likewise is going to be starting shortly here as well with the infusion of lower elementary, working on a trajectory to have students all in place by the end of October. So, we're certainly following what's working for them and what's not working for them as we go, because our proposal is to go back obviously in November. We've certainly are talking with them on essentially a daily basis. So our preparedness plans are constantly being tweaked as we learn of experiences and things that, from other people as they're navigating through this remote to in-seat environment as well. In terms of the COVID statistics, if you put those up, Julie.
Dr. Shores, one question before Ms. Monroe gets away from us. I really appreciate the fact that those 72 families were identified and need that additional assistance, and we're able to provide that assistance in hours that support them. The only question, I know it was at Deerfield, based on the survey, was that the area that most of the families came from, or was that just the building that was most available?
Well, actually, we had to comply with the state and food regulations. So I learned very quickly that there are restraints or regulations on the number of locations within a current day, and they had to be pre-existing locations that had already been approved. So Deerfield had been an afternoon pickup that was low on the attendance. So we've advertised through phone call, email. Quite honestly, it was the most rapid solution to be able to distribute food to the community.
Nope, agree. I love the idea. I was just questioning the how we got to the location. That's all.
We did explore dropping off food, and we got a really quick no.
All right, thank you, and great job on that.
Yeah, another quick question. You mentioned the survey response was a little low. What was the actual percent based on our student population?
Hold on, I'm doing the math real quick.
Okay.
We have about 2,500 families. So we had 760, 763. So
27%.
not high. So I'm hoping that we get much more of a response on these commitment surveys than just a little over a quarter.
I can share that the commitment survey response rate is already at a higher completion, not percentage-wise, but rate of completion, participation. The other thing is, our first survey in August and this survey and then this commitment form that we just put out is higher stakes. People had an option.
Right.
They did not have to comply to every question. There was some sensitive information. So I knew it would be less, but I was really hopeful for more than what we had.
But right now it's still 60-40 is what you're seeing. Okay.
And so on the teaching staff, what is the total population of teaching? What percentage responses do we get?
We have 229 teachers.
And this response rate of the 172 is inclusive of all staff, secretary, para, teachers, admin. So
total staff's around 400.
43%.
Okay. And then one of the questions I have is, I noticed that some people were unsure. What do we do about that unsure population? I guess maybe you'll talk about it later as we figure out how to engage them in the learning environment.
So I can say that just in conversations with people, the unsuredness largely comes from wanting to better understand the protocols, the safety protocols. So, they're looking for, what are our policies, our procedures for, how we're handling students, how we handle COVID cases. So a lot of people are hesitant to, they're in that unsure category because they want to see what the COVID protocols are for when a student has COVID. How do we handle that? And so through the Oakland County protocols, the more that we get those out there, the more peace of mind people have about, okay, there is a consistent process, a very thorough process that's being used, not just by the school district, but by the Oakland County Health Department in partnership with the school district, that as cases come up, this is how they're handling them. And so, I think some hesitation was on the fact that people just didn't or don't have those details. So folks are waiting to make a decision, frankly, until they see what those safety and protocols, COVID protocols are.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so Julie, go ahead and put up the COVID statistics. So as you know, we're keeping track of what our local COVID statistics are. So Oakland County Health provides us with weekly statistics on kind of where the county sits with active COVID cases, how many new cases since the prior week, and they look at 14-day average counts, they look at 7-day counts, and right now in the county, everything is trending toward the good. That's why you see the green arrows. So numbers are dropping in terms of the total number of cases that are being reported. The 14-day average counts, the death counts, all of that, which we are tracking, are all currently falling. As you scroll down, the percentage of cases that actually become hospitalized, that trend is just a little over 2%, which has dropped from where it was 4 or 5% back at the end of August. That is now trending down to 2%, which is very good for us in terms of looking at a decision of confidence and moving toward in-seat. Percent positivity in the last 7 days is just a little over 3%. And again, that's down from, where it was sitting at the end of August to be, almost double that. So from a county perspective and where our numbers lie, certainly we are trending much better than we were, 6-8 weeks ago. The healthcare capacity is strong in terms of hospitals being able to accommodate illnesses related to COVID. The county risk level is at a level C, which we'll talk about in terms of their gradient of readiness to come back to school. And they are telling us as of a couple of days ago that looks to be shortly moving up to a B. So moving up to the next level toward the good. So we're happy to hear that. When you look at age groups and who's most affected by COVID, again, in our county, over the last week or so, you can see that numbers, particularly in that kindergarten, even through grade 12, is decreasing. The high school age was increasing there for a time, and that is now showing a decrease in cases. There's a minimal number of cases, obviously, from kindergarten through 8th grade. We've really been watching the high school and trying to make a decision as to how long do we hold off high school. Those numbers are trending rather positively at this point. So, the confidence level certainly is different from a COVID case perspective than when we were sitting at, toward the end of August, beginning of September. From the amount of cases that are in Avondale, because I'm also tracking those. So when I look at the school district and what are the active number of cases in the school district, and that is in the school district community, there are 15 active cases of COVID in the Avondale community. What that relates to is about 5.8 individuals per 10,000. So again, for that perspective, that's a fairly low rate when you consider the population of our entire Avondale community. And there are 15 active cases, or again, 5.8 per 10,000. That's pretty low. So, you know, when we're weighing about, you know, when is the time to bring, you know, folks back, as if there is, you know, a great time to bring kids back versus another. You know, right now, the stats are telling us that, you know, it's a relatively confident time to be bringing people back. You know, and everybody has opinions from stem to stern, of course, on, well, when you bring them back, then they're going on Thanksgiving, and then they're going on Christmas, and then, you know, they're going to get sick and come back. And frankly, no matter when you decide to bring students back, there is going to be a risk. There's never going to be a non-risk time to say, okay, now is the time. We have to look at the leading indicators of what the cases are telling us, and start to bring, you know, folks back, although cautiously, and with strict protocols in place, and we move, you know, from there. But certainly the statistics are showing us much better now than they have yet in terms of when to bring students back. And what we do know is when you look at the achievement data of students, I can tell you that there are a number of students who are not doing well in this remote environment, and they're pleading to come back. We've got special education students who desperately need their services. We have ELL students, English as a second language, you know, and those students are falling further and further behind in this remote environment. So, and you got to keep in mind that special education is, and ELL, you know, that comprises more than a fifth of our student population. And that is a group that is, or groups, I should say, that are, you know, I'll say suffering under remote learning. And, you know, those are some of our families that are really, really petitioning to get back in seat where we can curb their achievement gap. Because right now, there's probably a wider achievement gap than we've had in a long, long time because of, you know, remote is not for every student. And the longer we go in that capacity, there are students who are certainly not benefiting and falling further and further behind. So you have to take all that into consideration, you know, and determine, well, when is the when to come back? And, you know, the statistics, the indicators on all of our fronts in terms of a preparedness level from a COVID case perspective are telling us that, yep, you know, this is a time that we can confidently begin to bring students back. And we're not the only ones. Like I said, Troy's bringing people back as we speak. Rochester, because again, we're all looking at the same statistics, and we're all looking at the same, frankly, level of community confidence to move forward in that realm. And we know kids are, there's elements of kids that just, that achievement gap is growing. So, so if we can put up the other COVID chart, Julie. So when we look at the county gradient of in-school readiness, you can see that they had us based on their statistics at a level C. They look to be moving that. We're right on the edge, I'll say, of B to C. No, the gradient chart with the colors. Yep. There we go. All right, so as you scroll down to the second page, so here you have the county gradients, and you can see that right now they've got us leveled at a C, and they are ready to move it to a B. So as you can see, where you have at the top of the rubric per se, where it says no cases in school buildings, it says in-person allowed with strict mitigation measures. So again, confidence there under C. And again, you know, as cases would begin to develop, if they should begin to develop, then you have to consider, you know, reduced density or, you know, the social distancing, the contact tracing, the sanitizations, all of those things. But again, when you're looking at C, soon to be B, certainly the confidence level from the county perspective is erring on the side of a greater confidence in in-seat instruction at this point in time. So, so with that, that's, you know, from a statistics perspective, you know, that helps us to you know, again, garner that level of confidence. And again, when we have our school nurses that have done walkthroughs of buildings and reiterate that with our, you know, social distancing protocols and procedures as they exist around lunch and specials and, you know, traffic flow in hallways and outside playground usage and all of that stuff, having their confidence in their review of our protocols certainly helps us as well. So, you know, we're really appreciative of their efforts. All right. So with that, as we move to our next slide will be the template of what we're looking at in terms of coming back. So I'd like to put the proposed timeline up. All right, so our proposed timeline is really looking at our levels in coming back beginning the week of November 16th. Why November 16th? Well, certainly, you know, the board had indicated that we'd be remote through November. And all along I've said, we don't want to accelerate that. We don't want to come back early as other districts have, because I think we need to take the time and plan methodically. You know, being first back in seat is not a race I want to win. So, you know, let Troy and those others that decided to come back early, let them, we'll learn from their mistakes, put it that way. So the board said November, and, you know, I certainly have advocated that we stay with that November timeframe so that we can get the proper planning and review in place. And this would bring us back, this proposal has us back starting incrementally at the beginning, or I should say the beginning of the day of November 16th. And we would start at elementary in this plan, starting with grades TK, our transitional kindergarten, through grade 2. And that is for the alphabet A through L. And then the second half of the alphabet would come on that 17th of November, and then all the students take TK through 2 would come on the 18th, followed by then 3-5, A through L on the 19th, and grades 3 through 5, M through Z on the 20th. So that by the 23rd, we would have K through 5 integrated in. And the reason why we would have them in on this incrementation is so that we can align our resources to concentrate on these groups coming back, because, you know, education is not going to be the education that kids were in back in February. Kids are coming back to a more traditional setting. It's not going to be the project-based learning and all of the collaborative types of teachings that we've been doing. Those are on hold right now. Right now, we're interested in getting kids back in seat safely, social distanced, and that means a difference in what the classroom looks like and how it operates from where it was back in February. And so we need to concentrate resources on teaching students, primarily elementary students, on all the aspects of the new rules surrounding social distancing, around hand washing, around mask wearing, around, all of those new protocols that essentially didn't exist pre-COVID. So being that this is a new environment they're coming to, we need to be purposeful about instructing our students with these. Likewise, in the same week, our gifted and talented program would transition in with their 2-3 split, their 3-4 split on the first 2 days of that week. And then the other grades would transition in starting on the 18th into that program. In middle school would come with just 6th grade because we need time with just the 6th graders. They are new to that building. They haven't been there before, so we understand that some of this also is an orientation for those students, and we want to make sure that those students are feeling confident in coming to school. So we're spending a couple days, the 17th and the 18th, with just our 6th graders, and then 6th and 7th graders on the 19th. And then on the 20th, we would have the 6th through 8th graders. From a high school perspective, again, similarly to the middle schoolers, we would have 9th grade attend because, again, it's a new building for that group. They would spend the first 2 days, the 17th and the 18th, at the high school getting orientated, and then followed by 10 through 12, which would come on the following 19th and 20th. So that essentially by Thanksgiving, folks that are in seat, regardless of grade level, are transitioned in. So, and then that would be obviously the protocol going forward. And again, if situations arise and we have to all go remote again because of increases in COVID or what have you, then we certainly have flexibility in our plans and the capability to do so. We mentioned from a technology perspective that we will be one-to-one with our technology. We're told by the end of November, all the last of our devices will be in that we have ordered that will put us at 1 device per child, so that if their need arises to have to switch on the fly to go remote, students have that capability. In addition, if we have to end up quarantining a classroom and that classroom has to go remote, we have the devices to enable that to happen on the fly. So that shouldn't be, an issue from being able to transition and move in an environment that could be fluid. And I think that positions us well in terms of, moving forward and catching up on some of the achievement gap. Notice that, we are transitioning in on this type of alternate schedule only for a short duration, really through a week or so. You're hearing districts that are going to these alternate schedules where you have half the alphabet that comes, as you see here, on half of the day, and the other half of the alphabet that comes on the next day, and or they come, one half of the alphabet comes in the morning, one half of the alphabet comes in the afternoon. And that's the schedule that they're running in perpetuity. That, to me, is a disaster. You have, in those cases, teachers working twice as hard because they're having to teach remote and in seat at the same time. And in reality, the students are getting half the curriculum. So while I see that as a short-term solution, I don't see that as a long-term benefit to anybody, to the families. It's no more, where your kid's in session 2 days a week and remote 3 days a week, and that's no more convenient for a family. It certainly is no more beneficial instructionally for a student. nor is it instructionally beneficial for the teacher that's got to prepare for all of that and manage all that. It's fraught with inefficiencies, and the one who pays is the student. So from the get-go, I've been on record saying I'm opposed to all of those alternate schedules because it doesn't benefit the student in the end. You end up shortchanging the student. It's either all or none. We're either all remote or we're all in seat. And the fact of the matter is, if we're looking at a 60-40 in seat, 60 in seat, 40 remote, that should put class sizes relative to social distancing into a means whereby there should be no need to have to alternate anything in our schedule to accommodate that. So, so that's, again, I think we're positioned nicely at this point to be able to transition to this type of a schedule without having to do any type of alternate schedules to accommodate a social distancing. And certainly, in terms of the COVID statistics, I just think, the time is right to entertain this for the folks that want it. So, so I'll stop there and ask if there are questions.
Yeah, Dr. Schwartz, while you're on talking about the schedule here going back, I think it was the last meeting, we talked about a schedule that was, I guess, broader than this one. And this looks compressed.
Yep.
Compared to what we had heard before.
Yep.
What's the rationale for compressing that down and I don't want to say rushing because it may not, that's a judgmental word, but getting students back in class quicker than we had discussed prior?
So it's compressed in that we've narrowed it for a couple of reasons. One is we had a lot of dialogue about the impact of trying to schedule these transitions around the breaks. Because you've got the Thanksgiving holiday tucked in there, and then right around the corner you've got the Christmas holiday. There's concern about that coming into play with rolling it out effectively. We wanted to give students ample time before they broke for the holidays to be in seat and to be into that routine. And frankly, what shook me is looking at the performance of students and where we're at. The number of students that are just not being successful, regardless of the efforts of staff, special education students that need servicing, the ELL students that I spoke about. We're seeing that achievement gap just widen. And when you start to consider that, it's like that only exacerbates the longer you wait. And so to me, when we're looking at remedying the achievement gap and when we're looking at, those upcoming breaks that are in there, I'll say that's why we've condensed the transition in.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Schwartz, what's the ramifications if we were to start in-seat schooling early, like November 1st?
Well, the ramifications are that we probably won't have, that'll be cutting it close, probably too close, I'll say, for getting all of these schedules set and communicated to families. Because don't forget, over the next few weeks, we've got 2 weeks for our parents to respond. And we know that even after that 2-week period, we will have parents that didn't respond that we're going to have to spend time calling and reaching out to get a response. All of that is going to take the better part of this month to really get what the choices of families are. And then we have to pair that with going through at the same time, the staffing protocol to then match staff assignments with the demand from families and students. November 1st to get all that information tied in a bow and communicated to parents is I'll say, really, really pushing it.
I think you already answered this, but would we go back to a more traditional schedule then, or was it going to be every other day, the purple day, the gold day, and for the high school?
Yep, good question. So the schedules as we come back in seat are, we're still working on the final touches of those, but they will largely be what they have been in remote. We don't want to largely change what we started the year with. So students will already be in that routine from an elementary perspective, from a secondary perspective. We're putting the finishing touches on those, but largely we want to keep the essence of what schedules they had started. So like a block, we would like to continue in that block fashion. And again, because when we get back, we want to be able to cohort and keep kids in groups as much as possible. So we want to limit the transitions of students once they're back in our buildings. And so that block schedule really assists us in alleviating a lot of the transition periods for students to mix. Any other questions?
Are parents allowed to ask questions?
Not at this time. Any questions from the board?
Yeah, and so when you think about staffing, how does that look in, or because we have the unsure, and then we have the people who are uncomfortable, and the people who are ready to do in-person learning. How will the execution of making sure that there are enough teachers in person to facilitate that education?
We're going to go over that staffing with you. We've been working with the teachers union has been solidified. We've also worked with our attorneys on that as well. From a HIPAA perspective, it's solid. So, so we, that's part of our presentation this evening. So we will get to the staffing pieces of it.
Okay.
All right. So, I will say with one of the big questions I'm getting outside of the commitment for the year from parents, which I addressed a little earlier, is about masks. And if masks weren't the hot topic before, they sure are now, right? After the Michigan Supreme Court had given everybody a surprise on Friday evening regarding the rescinding of the governor's executive orders, which included the requirement for K through 12 students to wear masks. So I've been fielding a lot of calls, obviously, over the weekend and through today about that. For students, masks from a K-12 perspective will still be required. Nothing in our requirements has changed in light of the rescinding of the governor's executive orders. And in fact, Saturday morning, the Oakland County Health Department gave an edict to schools that masks are to be worn K-12 and reiterated the same language that were in the governor's prior executive orders. We received this evening from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, the MDHHS, that statewide they are enacting K-12 mask wearing for students and the same limits on spectators, all the things essentially that dealt with crowd sizes with schools and mask wearing that were in previous executive orders, they are now executing. And they have the authority. They have the authority to enforce those. They have the authority, they've told us, to exercise fines, all of those for non-compliance of mask wearing. So we are obligated to continue, as our plans were, to have K-12 students wear masks. That is now a statewide mandate by the statewide health department. So, and they carry the same authority, if not more authority, than what the governor's executive orders are. So So while folks thought that there was going to be relief on that, there is not. So we will be under the obligation to have our students comply with wearing masks. Now, with that being said, we can offer mask breaks where students, if they are socially distanced enough, they can remove their mask and have some time without a mask. But again, that's once we have social distancing that's in place for the students to enable those mask breaks to occur. So, and we are cognizant of that, and we will be scheduling those because we know it's difficult to wear a mask all day. We know it's difficult as an adult to wear a mask all day. So we will be cognizant to be, scheduling those as we have time in the schedule where social distancing will permit those mask breaks.
And so, Dr. Schwartz, what does the enforcement look like? I know,
I can't speak to that. I don't know what the enforcement looks like. We got that edict an hour before this board meeting.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you just yet what that looks like.
Yeah.
That will be coming in the coming days. And I suspect that there will be other edicts that will be coming down, both from the statewide health department and from our local Oakland County Health Department, that will essentially replicate what the executive orders were that we will be bound by. They've already told us that essentially that's what's going to happen. So. All right, so at this time, what I want to kind of go over is, what we're doing relative to COVID protocols and kind of what happens if, there is a student or a staff member that has a positive diagnosis. So Dan, I know you have, we're going to put up those protocols. If you can kind of take us through those.
Yep.
I know your committee's been working with those. Julie, do you have those COVID protocols? There we go.
So these protocols were released towards the end of September, or I should say the flow charts were released. They had been developing the protocols over the month of August and September. As a district, we have chosen that we really wanted to utilize the flow charts and the information that is coming directly from the community or the Oakland County Health Department, just to keep everything consistent, across the district, with respect to the information that the nurses are providing, and then the information that the county health department is providing with these flow charts. So what we have been doing is utilizing these flow charts by giving them to the building levels, just so that they can become aware of what to expect if a student or a staff member tests positive or if they're exposed to COVID-19. And then from there, we'll go through here shortly a couple of different forms that we have that we've also been distributing to the buildings for them to gather information of suspected cases. So this flow chart here basically kind of gives the overall view of what to do if a staff member or student reports a positive result of COVID-19. In all cases, whether it's a positive result or if it is an exposure or a suspected COVID case, we are requiring the buildings to fill out a form that we'll go over here in a minute That form will gather information for us that we can then utilize and consult with the health department, and then keep a record of any suspected cases, students or staff that maybe had symptoms or whatever it might be. We just want to keep track of everything. So at any point, if the central office does get a form sent to them, we are keeping record of those. The county health department only requires that we send them the forms for a confirmed positive case. And for them, it's more of officially documenting it. And then from there, they are able to start the contact tracing process. So I know we mentioned before, but all student forms will be sent to myself. So we have communicated to the buildings that if there is any student-related cases, whether suspected or confirmed, those will go through me. And then all staff-related cases will go through Sharon Hyde, our Executive Director of Human Resource. And we just felt that the way the subcommittees have been set up, and just to spread out the workload between Sharon and myself, and then in conjunction with Cabinet at Central Office, we would work together just to ensure that we're following all the county guidelines. So that's the overall process of reporting these cases, where the district will get these forms filled out and send them over to the county health department. And then for all confirmed positive cases, and at that point, the case is assigned to a case investigator who will then go through and start the contact tracing process. They will conduct phone interviews and obtain all the information that they need to help determine if there were any close contacts, and then they would be in touch with those individuals and letting them know exactly what they should be doing with respect to quarantining. So that's kind of the overall process if we do have a positive case. So those ones are more straightforward. At that point, if it is confirmed positive, we would ask the student or the staff member to obviously not come to school, and then work with the county health department. So on this page here, this is more of what happens if a student or a staff member becomes symptomatic at school. And this is really that fine line of, us as a district, we're not medical professionals, so how are we going to determine whether somebody has COVID-19 or if they have the flu or a cold or just a stomach ache in general or whatever it might be. So in consultation with the health department and our nursing staff that we have on hand now, essentially, if there are any staff members or students that exhibit any symptoms that would be similar to COVID-19, we're playing it safe and just suggesting that those student or staff member get sent home. We have isolation rooms in all of the buildings. So if there is a student that is suspected to have any kind of symptoms, they would be asked to go to this isolation room where they would be monitored, and they would be required to stay until they could get picked up by a parent. And then obviously any staff members exhibiting symptoms, they would just be requested to go home at that time. And then from that point, we are recommending that they contact a medical provider and then get a test if possible. So the nurses have really stressed that, testing is not necessarily required. And if you do not get a test, then there are a certain number of days that you have to wait until you are able to come back. So if you've been tested for COVID-19, then if you get a positive result, that's when they would fill out the form for us, and we would start working with the Oakland County Health Department. And at that point, after being confirmed positive, you would be in isolation at home for at least 10 days, and at least 24 hours must have passed without a fever, without taking any kind of medication. And other symptoms would have had to improve. If the positive test result came back negative, you could return with proof of a negative result, so long as the symptoms have improved and you do not have a fever for at least 24 hours without any kind of fever-reducing medication. So that's the scenario if you do get tested. You either, yes, you did test positive, you would self-isolate for 10 days, or if you did test negative, you have to prove that, and then you would have to show that you do not have any symptoms. If you decide not to get tested, then you simply would have to be excluded for at least 10 days since the symptoms first started, and at least 24 hours have passed without any kind of fever or fever-reducing medication. Or subsequently, you could also get a doctor's note from the doctor that would have diagnosed you with something else that is not COVID-related, and that would allow you to return as well. So that's kind of what we're working with at the building levels, just giving them this information but we certainly don't expect them to have to handle every case on their own. We want this to be a collaborative effort between the building administration, the staff that is involved, or the student, and then central office as well. That way everybody is aware of what's going on and we can follow the process accordingly. So if we go to this slide right here. So
Hey, Dan, before you move
Yep.
off of that, can I ask you a question real quick?
Yep.
Do we, because specifics matter in cases like this. So
Mhm.
do we have a list of what you're considering symptoms? Because I mean, some of the generalized symptoms that are being put out are things such as headaches.
Yep.
I know that, on behalf of some of our teachers on National Teachers Days, I'll bet there's days that most of our teachers go home with headaches.
Yep.
What are we considering symptoms?
So the county has put out a symptom chart, and I'll just briefly read it and then we can kind of go through it. So fever, chills, cough, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, fatigue, muscle or body aches, headache, new loss of taste or smell, sore throat, congestion or runny nose, nausea or vomiting, and diarrhea. So, in consulting with them, especially about the headache question, because I'm sure a ton of people get headaches all the time. So they generally will ask about it. Like if it's a new onset headache, something that you've never experienced before, or something that that, if you've had a stressful day, it might be expected that you're going to have a headache. So that's something where we can consult with the nursing staff, whether it's the staff or the building administrator, or even the central office if they want us to call the county health department and talk to an epidemiologist. And if it's only a headache is your primary symptom, then at that point, I think that's something where the nursing staff and the epidemiologist will use some judgment to determine that, okay, if that's the only symptom is a headache, you've had a stressful day, whatever it might be, they would say that just continue to monitor for other symptoms. And if you start getting a fever or a cough or something else, then at that point, we would recommend isolation.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that.
Yep. So, and then just kind of this page here talks about reporting. So if you did test positive for COVID-19, as we mentioned, you would stay at home for the 10 days. And then after that, you would have to have symptom-free, no fever for at least 24 hours, and then no use of any kind of fever-reducing medication. But a negative test is not required to return. And I think that's the big thing that the nursing staff had recommended to us was you could get tested on day 2 of after you've been exposed, you could get tested on day 2 and be negative, but by day 7, it's showing up as positive. So that's where the county health department is really stressing, and even the CDC, they're really stressing the number of days since exposure, the number of days since you've been having symptoms. So that's why they say a negative test is not necessarily required for you to return to school, so much as it is you have to have a set number of days between the time you've experienced symptoms or the time you thought you were exposed. And then, so this chart just kind of goes through the different scenarios if you think you've been in contact with somebody that has tested positive. So it asks a question about, were you within 6 feet of a positive case for more than 15 minutes? This is the big question we get when we've called the county health department. They essentially want to know, were you in close proximity to someone for more than 15 minutes within that 6-foot radius? And if you are, then we would consider you a close contact. And at that point, you would be required to self-isolate for a 14-day period. And I mentioned before, but I'll repeat again, there's a difference between a 10 and a 14-day quarantine. A 10-day quarantine is primarily for those that have tested positive because they're already exhibiting symptoms. 14-day quarantine is required for somebody who was a close contact because generally speaking, they see anywhere from 1 to 4 days is what people are experiencing for that incubation period before they start showing symptoms. So for somebody that does not have symptoms and they are exposed to somebody who is confirmed to be positive and they're deemed a close contact, they simply would be asked to stay home for 14 days. And then, like I said before, if you've been exposed, you can get a test if you want a test, but we're still going to require you to stay at home for 14 days because on day 2 or 3 of getting that test, it may show negative, but by day 10, it's showing positive. So that's why the health department is firm on just the number of days after exposure you're required to stay home. So that's kind of the general overview of the county health department and what we've been following to date. And then here that Julie's showing right now, these are the forms that we're having the buildings fill out. So this is a staff form. It just collects basic information that we can keep on file, whether you've tested positive or if you just are suspected to have symptoms. That way, when we have these forms filled out, we have them on file. And then if a suspected case does turn positive, we have the information already, and then we can send it off to the county health department. So, and then on the next page is just the student form as well. So we've just simply asked all of the building administrators to work with their staff and have these forms filled out for us. That way we have all of the applicable information that we need on file, and then we can just keep track of this as well. You know, if we have to do any kind of contact tracing, you know, we at least have this information on hand already. So that's
Hey,
kind
Dan,
of, yep.
real quick, just on the teacher and the student forms. Those are forms that we would fill out in case of a concern, or those are forms everybody's going to fill out walking in the door?
No, there's a health screening form that we do separately. That's something that staff would have to fill out every day.
Right.
We also have an acknowledgement waiver that we will be sending to parents, just basically letting them know that it's going to be on them every morning to check their child for symptoms each morning, or if they do have any symptoms, to hold them back from coming to school. These forms specifically are for any student or staff member that has tested positive and they call us to let us know, or if a student has symptoms, or if they were a close contact possibly, we're asking them to fill these out only in those few cases. Okay. So this is more of a as needed basis, where if we have anybody testing positive or exposed, we're requiring the buildings to fill these out. So, you know, that's not a daily thing necessarily.
Okay. And then in addition, the follow up to that would be in a situation where a student goes into the quarantine room. Is that documented somewhere, or even if they're, I guess I'm trying to think of the COVID police at this point at the building level. If a student goes home and they don't fill out one of these and they come back tomorrow, is there some checks and balances at the building level that we have some assurances or know why that student left outside of this form, or is this form it?
So this form, if there is a student that is suspected to have symptoms during the school day, they would be put into the isolation room until they can be picked up. At that point, we would have the building administrators fill out a form for the student in the isolation room, since they're exhibiting the symptoms. That way we can keep track of anybody that has, you know, been in the isolation room or has had symptoms or tested positive. We're just housing all of these forms in a folder. That way we can maintain them.
Okay, so if somebody petitions to come back and says, I feel better today, and we go through the workflow and say, nope, you're supposed to be gone for 10 days. There's resources available to support that on top of everything else we got going on, right?
Yep. Yeah, and that's why we like this form, because it's going to log the date and everything on it. That way we can assure that, okay, this is the date that they were reporting to us that they were exposed or they had symptoms or whatever it might be. It's just a quick reference for us to keep things organized and efficient, as you know, depending on the level of cases that we do have.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
So have we developed, or are we thinking about developing either brochure, one page or so, the what if? So say, you know, you do show some symptoms, a student goes in, parent comes to pick up. Are we going to have, you know, a brochure, 1 or 2 pager saying, all right, here are your next steps of what you may want to do, or here are the time frames. Hey, you got 10 days here, or you got 14 days, just so there's no questions coming back, and so it's clear to everyone what the expectations are for symptoms and things like that.
So are you referring to like something distributed to parents or to staff? Or
to parents. So say a student is showing symptoms, parents come pick up that particular student. Are we going to have something ready for, you know, for the student and or the parents to say, here are the next steps, you know, you might want to consider taking, etc.
Yeah. So up until this point, we kind of distributed to the administrators just what the protocol will be with respect to what happens if a student reports symptoms or a positive case. And then at that point, the building administrators and the staff member would reach out to the family of that student just to kind of walk them through, okay, this is what's happening. We encourage you to go see a medical provider and get tested. But if you don't, then just know you have to be out for 10 days or 14 days, depending on the scenario. We certainly could look at putting these flow charts on our website just as a reference for parents as well. These were just distributed from the county health department, so it's open information, but I think that might be a good resource for them to, because it walks through multiple different scenarios of what's going on. But ultimately, it comes down to the communication that we're having with the family from the building level after consulting with central office and the county health department.
And if I understand what Chip's saying, the other thing we could do is just make a simple checklist for the student saying, okay, we have now believe they're exhibiting symptoms, so this is their checklist, versus somebody who's been exposed, this is their checklist. So it's just really simple to set up the expectation for the parent that says, okay, you need, since you are exhibiting symptoms, you have to make sure check, and then they'll be able to come in no earlier than this.
Yep. Yeah, we can certainly look at, there is another county health department document that I think lays it out more in like a bullet point format.
Yeah.
Which might be a little bit easier to read.
Yeah.
That was within a toolkit they sent us, versus these flow charts can get kind of messy when you're going up and down, left and right. And
because we're actually making the assessment of which path they're on by telling them they're going home.
Yep.
And is there a resource to provide, testing locations to go get the COVID test? Because not every doctor's office is going to allow you to come in and get a COVID test. And no, mine doesn't. So, are there any resources by the county health department where you could at least direct parents to a website to say, hey, if you want to get your, student tested, you can go to such and such location?
Yeah, they do provide a list of locations within Oakland County. I think actually at the Oakland County main offices, I think they have testing sites there as well. So and they got phone numbers you can call to contact the county health department. Yep.
And that'd be good to put on a sheet too, if you guys choose to do up a 1-page or 2-page or just front and back, suspected COVID, now what? Just for something, Yeah,
because a lot of ones don't allow you to get a test unless you're exhibiting symptoms. So if you think you've been exposed, you may not be able to get a test.
Sure.
Dan, can I just add a couple of things onto the isolation room for you?
Yes.
So currently we do have a draft document, so basically an exit form for that student to take home. That gives the parent that guidance that Dan had walked through the flow chart. Our nurses are reviewing some of those drafts. But additionally, it is our aim to be able to pre-program attendance based on the outcome of that student's exit for isolation, so that they don't return back into school sooner. So then the person that's working the isolation room at the end of the day would then take any of those forms to the attendance office of the high school, the middle school, or the elementary building, so that we can pre-program the next day's attendance. That student wouldn't be coming back without a doctor's note or without clearance. So it's not as tricky with the elementary age students, still very important and tricky, but with the high school students and the middle school students having multiple classes or multiple entry points during the day, we want to try to make sure that we support our main office staff and our classroom teachers as efficiently as possible.
And then should the student be so unfortunate to be sent home, then the 14 days or 10 days, they would just be taking their coursework home, or would they jump to an online platform? Because like 10 to 14 days is a lot. Would they just be getting, how would they finish or execute their education?
So in the event of a quarantine where you have a child who's going to be home, that is like an extended absence. So it would be treated in the same way, that, you would have a connection with the classroom so that they're not losing step with their classmates. So it would become, in a sense, in a remote format, with their current teacher in those circumstances.
Yeah. An extended absence, purely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
That was kind of all of the county level protocols. I don't know if there's other stuff you want to cover with respect to that, or.
Well, they will be, the county will be guiding us in each of those situations. So we will be under their advice and they conduct the contact tracing. We don't do that. That's them. So, they will be coming in to conduct all of that. But the advisement of, when you have to make a decision per se to close a classroom, that will be coming from the health department. So, they will be advising in those situations where those types of decisions need to be made. We pray they don't, but they're on hand to help guide us and advise us in each of those scenarios.
So has there been any talk now that we're into flu season, how to differentiate, if there's even a way to differentiate between the two? Or is it, hey, you might just have, the common run-of-the-mill flu, so you're out regardless, versus COVID? I assume there's no real way we can disseminate from that and figure who has the flu and who has COVID. And
Right. That's not, again, we're not medical professionals. So
right.
Our
Correct.
secretaries, and our principals are not diagnosing kids. That is not, we're not going to call and say your kid's got the flu or your kid's got COVID, or, we're going to say your kid is symptomatic.
Systematic. Okay.
And it's going to be incumbent upon the parent to follow up on that with their pediatrician, physician, whomever,
Okay.
to determine if it's the flu or not. That's not going to be something that we're going to say, we're not doctors, and
Right.
nor are we going to pretend to be. So that's going to be incumbent upon the family to do that.
Yeah. And it just like Dr. Schwartz, if I understand what you're saying, if we execute the protocol, like if a student comes in with a headache, sore throat, perhaps loss of taste, and they had the common flu, it would follow under the path as we would basically assume that they have COVID, they would have to follow the rest of the protocol.
Correct.
Yeah.
We're going to err on the side of caution.
Sure.
So, we'd be circling back and interfacing with that family as to, what did you find out? So that we can then proceed appropriately.
Yeah, and even if they said I'm just playing this out, like if I read the chart right, is they found out, hey, we got tested, he or she doesn't have COVID, we could still make them wait the 24 hours or 36 hours, so they're do not have a fever, et cetera, and then they could follow the admission process or come back in.
Correct. Yep.
Could you explain again if say a student gets diagnosed with COVID, they're out for extended absence, do they go to remote learning? Do they go back to their old schedule, or do they get special teachers, or do they get their original teachers?
So no, they're going to be working with their teachers just as they would now, pre-COVID, when a student had an extenuating absence or an extended absence, that we would cover the bases in terms of making sure that student is not falling behind in the time that they are out. To assign them to a new teacher in that time period, who's to say that new teacher is on the same lesson in the same, that will not benefit that student. So it's going to have to be with the current set of teacher or teachers, and we would handle that in much the same way that we handle an extended absence. And there may be, it'll mostly be, I'll say, asynchronous work or contacts, perhaps with some remoteness that's interspersed in there, understanding the situations. And it depends on, if it's one student in the class or if it's 10 students in the class. I mean, it's going to make a difference instructionally in terms of how that's handled. But assigning them to a new teacher, which I think is your question, wouldn't suffice, because those other teachers aren't going to be in the same exact spot that teacher is in that certain, lesson to provide, a seamless instructional continuation.
Yep. Agreed.
So the teacher, all right, quick question. So
Yeah.
The teacher would be potentially doing in class and then an asynchronous online.
Perhaps. That may perhaps be a solution.
I think the easiest way to think about it is, if I'm hearing you right, Dr. Schwartz, is, I'm going to show my old age here, but the old days of mono running rampant through the school.
Yep.
You were out for a good week to 10 days if you had mono.
Or chicken pox, or yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you were taking work home and had contact with the teacher, things of that nature.
Correct.
Benefit is we can send you home with a Chromebook and you can at least see office hours or something like that every once in a while. Okay.
Correct. Yep. I just want to circle back because Terry, you had asked a question about the condensing of the schedule. And another reason for condensing the schedule, primarily from a secondary perspective, a high school perspective, is for the students that aren't successful remotely, that coming back in seat at this juncture when we propose would enable them to have an impact on, I'll say, resurrecting their grades by the time the marking period ends. So it gives them, sufficient time to get back on track and raise their grades before the end of the semester. So, that's another reason, for those that aren't being successful remotely, they have a bigger window before the end of the marking period to raise their grades. So, that's another reason. I want to jump to classroom setups. We talk about, how do we arrange classrooms and prepare for this new environment. And so Colleen's been working with, her groups in looking at, how do we design classrooms, because not all classrooms in the district obviously are the same size. We have vastly different size classrooms within buildings, let alone between buildings. So, how do we accommodate for that? So the county has agreed on the social distancing of 3 to 5 feet so that we can accommodate all the different spaces that exist as classrooms throughout districts. So that 3 to 5 feet is what we're planning around. Obviously, we're planning more toward the higher end of social distancing and what that may look like, in classrooms. And one of the reasons why there's the mask enforcement K-12 is because you can't necessarily guarantee at all points in a day that students are going to be 6 feet apart from one another. You're dealing with children. It's unrealistic to think that, you're never going to be within 6 feet of somebody else in a building. We as adults don't do so. To think that when you pack a building with kids, that's going to be the case. So that's why there's the mask enforcement, because the research shows that, the mask is the biggest deterrent to the contraction of COVID. And so while you're not able to social distance necessarily at 6 feet at all times, the mask being worn is the requirement to again, be that major deterrent. So Colleen, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of talk about the, classroom, kind of what we're thinking about with classrooms and setups, and we've set up some mock classrooms in the district at each of the levels of spacing of desks, and there's some classrooms have desks, some classrooms have tables, so we're looking at the whole variety of different types of configurations as we're planning. So Julie, if you can put up the classroom setup. Yep, right there. All right, Colleen, if you can kind of guide us through your work here.
Good evening, Board of Education. Thank you, Dr. Schwartz. This is a summary of just how we would set up our classrooms. We want to make sure that we can attend school face-to-face, but also prioritize health and safety at the same time. With the implementation, we have a checklist, and our building leadership will work with our teachers to make sure that our desks and our tables are set up in the appropriate ways. We need to make sure that we have anything that is extra furniture or personal items that take up space are removed. Our architects gave us plans that laid out the classrooms, but those plans don't take into account anything that can be removed that is unnecessary. And so those things will have to be removed. The checklist does show that we have sneeze guards on the teacher's desks, that we are going to use one directional spacing of student desks, that we're seating our students 3 to 5 feet apart. Also that we have the signage in the hallways, the cafeterias, classrooms, anywhere where students are going to be, that there is signage that gives them direction. You've seen it in our administrative building, and it will be in all of our buildings and classrooms as well. The hand sanitizer or a sink in each room. And then also walking areas clearly marked to promote social distancing. Now this checklist doesn't have this on here, but this is where that gradual return, where we stagger our starts, is pretty important, so that our students can start to learn that they don't just go everywhere that they used to go, that there are directional, there's direction on the floor and through the hallways, that we need to make sure that our students recognize that there are specific walking areas and places to stand. And that is going to take some time and some teaching. We're definitely going to have to teach those behaviors. These are just the universal safety precautions. We put these on here again. I don't think we can say these enough. So these were sent to me from Dan, so that we can make sure that we are reiterating that these are the things that we will be doing to keep our areas clean daily. We can scroll down through those because we've spoken quite a bit about those. And then these are the pictures. So sometimes it's easy to hear, but it's better to see. We have some visual learners. This is a sneeze guard placed on a teacher's desk. You can also see the wipes there. We'll probably have quite a few of those around. You can scroll down. This is a classroom at the middle school. So these are the desks spaced apart at the middle school appropriately. I think this is another angle, what that would look like. It's a larger room at the middle school. This is a room at the elementary school, what the desks look like here at the elementary. You can see not a lot of other things in the classroom. So we do have to remove materials to make sure that we have enough space for the desks. This is a classroom at the high school, different desks at the high school with the chairs attached. And we do have partitions if needed for tables and for specific student desks as well. So those are available. These are just examples of the signage that'll mark the social distancing. So those are on the floor, and then these would be on the walls. And again, these signs you've seen around. So we have them all throughout our administrative building. So not a whole lot to say about setting up classrooms, because there's not a whole lot that goes into them. Really, it's more about what's coming out of them and what we have to do to make sure that we space. And again, it is a challenge with furniture, but we're making it work. We're figuring it out, and we are grateful to the planning and the work that the architects did. So, and I want to thank Dan and Sharon and Annette for helping out with those classroom setups. So thank you very much.
Question, as I look at those classroom setups, is there based on the setups in the rooms at every building, is there a critical mass number of students and seats that we know right now, that we know we can't get above that number, or we're going to have problems and the classroom sizes don't work out?
Well, probably depending on the space. There may be times where if you have a class that has 30 students in it, we may have to move their classroom to a space that holds more with the social distancing. So depending on how the numbers come back, we may have to reconfigure where those classrooms take place. So the architects not only worked on classrooms, they also showed us the capacity at some other spaces. So our libraries and our auxiliary gyms, different areas that we can house desks at larger spaces.
Okay, yeah, just thinking out loud from a understanding, and we may wait till we get the numbers and understand the survey better, which is okay. But I would thinking ahead is there's going to be a critical mass number. And
so there is going to be, I'm sure, and that's why, again, I can't stress enough that it's incumbent for parents to return these surveys. We need to know what your choices are so we can plan appropriately. So yeah, we need to plan appropriately for staff, but we also need to plan appropriately for rooms, room sizes, because we need to know the numbers of kids that are coming back in a particular course or in a particular class, so that, again, from a space perspective, from a staffing perspective, we need those responses. We got to do better than a 27% response rate. We need to get those responses.
Especially with the default being that if we don't get a response, you're in class.
That's the default. Yep.
That's the concern.
Yep.
Okay.
Dr. Shores, can I add one thing just to kind of elaborate on some of these pictures that were shown? All of those were the 5-foot spacing from the center of each chair. That was the drawings that the architect had given us. So when we were setting these up, because that 3 to 5 foot distance in the classroom is what the county health department had agreed on, as long as students are wearing masks. We wanted to kind of be conservative with this and say, okay, let's go the full 5 feet and see how many we can fit in each classroom. So there may be instances where there might be a desk that's 4 feet apart or even 3 feet apart. It really just depends on the classroom. And we're working with each building to determine, on a class by class basis, this is how it's going to look. So we did those pictures at the 5 feet mark, but like I said, it may go less than that. And then there was a picture about the partitions for shared spaces and special cases. We've consulted with our nursing staff and the health department, and they say sneeze guards, they help for direct contact, but with children constantly being up and down, it's very difficult to keep them behind a sneeze guard. And so they say that they're not really as effective as it might appear to be. So our logic with the sneeze guards that we have for shared spaces and special cases is more so if there is a student that perhaps doesn't wear a mask because they can't medically tolerate it, and they're giving us a note that says they can't wear a mask, we would be able to provide one of these partitions for that student just to kind of protect those around that individual. So those we will have on hand just for certain cases, but like I said, the overall protective measure that it's providing, I don't think is as high as what it appears it would be.
And Colleen, when you guys Colleen and Dan, when you spaced out the rooms, roughly how many desks did you guys lose per classroom? Was it like 10%?
So I think like at the high school one, I think it was almost the second or the last picture there of the rooms.
Yep.
That one, I think we had, I think it was 30 or 32 desks, and I think I pulled 6 out.
Okay.
So, and that's at the 5 foot spacing. So
yep.
In theory, if you went to 4 foot, you could do a little bit more than that. And it was kind of the same at the middle school where I think I pulled 5 desks out. And
so we're not losing
27.
like 50% of our capacity.
No, and I think that's where the county health department came in and said, we'll go less than 6 feet, but you have to wear a mask at that point.
Yep.
So that certainly helps, and a lot of districts recognize that.
Yep.
Well,
you also have, go ahead, Dr. Schwartz.
I was going to say, you also have a solution where I'll leave the district unnamed, but when they have a room size that exceeds what the capacity should be, what they do is they rotate kids every 10 minutes. So they stand up and they move seats, because the caveat is, are you within 6 feet for 15 minutes? So if you're not within 6 feet in 15 minutes, then you're okay. So there are classrooms in this unnamed district that actually will had the kids essentially play musical chairs. They get up and they rotate every 10 minutes so that they're not in a 15-minute frame with any one kid. Highly disruptive to instruction when you've got to switch seats every 10 minutes, but it's an allowable solution to the county, apparently.
How are we treating kindergarten classrooms? I know we have lots of, unfortunately, extra furniture in there because they're in kindergarten. I know they're in some, at least at Deerfield, they're tables, they're not necessarily desks. Are we treating kindergarten the same way then and removing everything out of the kindergarten classrooms?
So yes, I mean, the kindergarten rooms aren't going to be as full of the, toys and
Right.
objects that they're accustomed to having. Yeah, there will be some, and those objects are going to have to be cleaned, which is why we're minimizing, because all of those blocks, toys, all of that has to be cleaned every time they use them. So, it's going to be minimized. It's not going to be absent per se, but they will be minimized.
Okay.
So speaking of cleaning, I'm going to have Dan kind of run down the cleaning or the sanitization schedules of our buildings and what's being done to ensure cleanliness. So Julie, if you can put up, yep, there we go, the health and protocol sheet. So again, this was Dan's committee.
So I'll briefly touch on a couple of these other items because this is kind of a comprehensive
Yeah.
document that we put together, which was, covering everything with respect to health and safety. So just Dr. Schwartz had talked about face coverings at the beginning. So nothing has really changed with our policy with respect to face coverings. The students are going to be expected to wear them at all times, whether that's on a bus, in a hallway, in a classroom. That's still going to be a requirement. And then obviously there will be exceptions. If a student cannot medically tolerate it, they can provide us with a doctor's note and then they would not have to wear their mask. And then special needs students who can't medically tolerate it, we just simply say that they don't have to wear one. We did purchase last week 2 cloth masks for every student and staff member. I expect those to be delivered within a week or so. So we will provide those 2 cloth face coverings to every student and staff. Obviously, they are welcome to wear their own. And if they do forget either their own or the ones we provide, then we would have disposable ones on hand as well. We also did order last week some lanyards for the K through 5 students. So those lanyards would be able to clip onto their mask and it would allow them to hold their mask up and, rather than constantly dropping it on the floor and picking it up and that kind of thing. We felt that a lanyard that you can pull off and break away so that it's not choking a student. We thought that was a good idea to have for them as well. So all of that was ordered and should be delivered within a week. And then there are signs all over the district at the entry points and then the reminders throughout the hallways just to constantly have that on at all times. And then as Dr. Schwartz mentioned, we will be integrating mask breaks into the daily schedules as well. For hygiene, so every classroom that has a sink will have soap, and then we will ensure our custodial staff is doing regular checks on those to make sure the soap dispensers are constantly full. Hand sanitizer, we were able to partner with Blake Cider Mill. They have sold us 1 gallon for every classroom in the district at a very reasonable cost, less than half what we were finding elsewhere, but it's a program they have that they sell to school districts and hospitals in the area at a very reduced price, essentially just to cover their costs. So that I think will be picked up next Tuesday morning. So we will be distributing those to every classroom. We're still going to encourage hand washing. There's going to be hand washing breaks integrated into the daily schedules. That is still the best and most effective way of removing the virus from your hands or any germs for that matter. But there's going to be scenarios where somebody needs a sanitizer. So we will have that option in every classroom. And then obviously signs will be installed. Currently they're by every bathroom, but they're also going to be throughout all the hallways, just encouraging healthy habits with respect to hand washing.
So Dan or Dr. Schwartz just said, I have a question. Going back to the mask. What about when you see people wearing shields? So do we put shields in the same, area as a mask? Is that one the same, or are we against shields? What's the position on those?
So the current CDC guidance says that shields aren't really as effective as a mask. So they encourage you to wear a mask with the shield.
Yeah.
A couple months ago, the policy was use a shield or a mask, but they've kind of backtracked on that.
Okay.
So in certain instances, we do provide shields, maybe to teaching staff more so if they're trying to teach and they need to have their mouth exposed to the students. That way the student can still see. But at this point, I think we still have the shields if we need them, but we still encourage a mask at the same time.
Yeah, that's kind of my opinion. Just when you see people wearing a shield, they think it's just doesn't seem as robust as a mask. So thanks for that.
Yep. So touching on the cleaning, so we, just as a quick update too with the cleaning, we have met with our custodial staff management, and they have begun the process of recruiting additional staff that will be added to each building for when we return. It generally takes them a couple, 2-3 weeks to get adequate staff on hand and trained. So they've started that process. We will meet with them just to finalize what number that'll be at each building. But just looking at the cleaning policies that have been in place to date, every day they are cleaning with just a paper towel or a rag and EPA approved disinfectants. They're cleaning all the areas that are occupied by staff and students. Any frequently touched surfaces such as door handles, light switches, benches, desktops, bathrooms, all of that is being cleaned periodically throughout the day. And then every night they'll go in and do a more thorough deep clean, again, using the paper towels and rags and cleaning supplies to clean off the desks and all the surfaces throughout the district. And then at the end of the week, after Friday, the school day ends on Friday, that's when they're using the electrostatic sprayers. So at that point, they're putting the same EPA-approved disinfectant into the electrostatic sprayers, and they're going through the entire building and spraying down all of the surfaces. Every building in the district now has a dedicated sprayer. We were able to locate some in the market and snag them while we could. So every building, and then including the transportation building for the buses, has a sprayer, and the buses have a fogging machine. We felt it was imperative that we have a sprayer dedicated to each building. That way it's easier for the custodial staff, but also more efficient just to do these more thorough deep cleanings at the end of every week. Those sprayers will also be applying an EPA-approved surface protectant. That protectant will be applied every 30 days, even though it does have a residual up to 90 days. So we will be using both of those products, both on a weekly and a monthly basis with the sprayers. The reason we don't spray every day is because the product can build up over time and cause streaks and things like that. So you really do need to be wiping the surfaces down. But for a more thorough deep cleaning, we can do the spraying once a week just to ensure that we're hitting any spots that maybe aren't as frequently touched, but still just broadly hitting the entire building. So that's been the protocol since the kids have started the school year, just on a daily and weekly basis. And then the busing, the transportation department will be using a fogging machine that uses the same products, both the surface protectant and the disinfectant on the buses between every run. So that's something that we will have constant communication with the cleaning staff just to ensure that they're following the protocol and meeting our expectations with that. And we certainly do think that adding additional staff will be a benefit to everybody. So the screening, that's where, as I mentioned earlier, parents will be required to screen their students daily before sending them to school or on the bus. And this is a recommendation from the federal all the way down to the local health departments. Staff will also be required to complete a health screening questionnaire at every entry point to the buildings every day that they show up for work. So these questionnaires will also be updated periodically. The CDC and the county health departments do update the requirements and recommendations for the health screening questionnaire. So we will be updating those on an as needed basis. And then positive cases, exposure and testing. This kind of goes over what I had talked about earlier, just with respect to the protocols that we have in place and how we will be handling positive cases. Chip, I know you had a comment about adding in those forms, to distribute them to the parents. The flow charts and the forms were actually included in their return to school guide. So those they do have already. So we can certainly look at maybe a more condensed version, just as like a cheat sheet of some sort for them to have as well.
Great.
And then just scrolling down to the HVAC, this is kind of a newer hot topic in the county. There's a lot of districts that are struggling to upgrade their HVAC filters based on recommendations. I would say around 10 weeks ago, we had ordered, based off the recommendation at the time of K&S Ventures, to order these MERV 13 air filters. Sid Blomberg from K&S had started testing these back then just to ensure that our system could even handle them. Not every HVAC system can handle these types of filters, being they're the highest rated filter that you can get for the type of equipment that we have. So I would say about 10 weeks ago, he had consulted with me to see if this was something we wanted to do, and we told him to go ahead and order these MERV 13 air filters, which he did, and we should be getting them within the next week or two. And at that point, they will be installed in all of the buildings prior to the students returning to in-person learning. So that was a recommendation from the EPA, the CDC, and the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers, was to upgrade to the highest compatible air filters that you can, which is a MERV 13. Generally, we run at a MERV 8, which is a little bit less, but still very effective. But based on their recommendations, we did decide that we wanted to upgrade ours to the highest ones possible. So these are primarily used during the colder months. When you do get into the warmer months, it does put too much strain on the system. So we will have to look at swapping them out on certain HVAC units if we need to, just so we don't do any kind of damage. But at that point, we are able to pull in all the fresh air from the outdoors as well, to help overturn that air quality in the rooms. And then obviously,
so Dan,
regular.
hey Dan,
Yep.
Quick question. This is Sid. So
Yep.
is it a function of having enough horsepower in a blower motor to blow through the extra filter?
Right. Yeah. And just when you have, like, during air conditioned months, when you're running your AC, it just, that in general puts more strain on a unit. So by increasing the filtration, you're essentially putting more strain onto that system, which then is having to work harder to push more air through. So primarily in more of the warmer months is when you have to be careful with these, but in the cooler months where you're just pulling regular air through, not necessarily air conditioned air, you can actually get away with upgrading to these filters. So, which I guess works in conjunction with cold and flu season and things like that, where we are able to use these higher graded filters during those times. And then so just regular maintenance is followed throughout the year. They're monitoring our systems 24/7, constantly ensuring that the temperatures are correct, airflow is correct, and that the equipment is operating to district standards. And then, as I mentioned, outdoor air is brought into the buildings year round. And then there's constant inspections on these units throughout the year. So just using those protocols, we are able to provide the most optimal and safe environment for our staff and students. And then we had just a brief summary here of just the transportation protocols. The transportation department has developed in-house a lot of their own protocols that they're going to use just to follow along with what the CDC and local health departments are recommending. So as I mentioned before, the district has a fogging machine that can be used. It's got 200-foot hoses, so we can do 2 buses at one time. So in between runs, we can fog an entire bus in around 12 to 13 minutes. And that's just using the same disinfectant virostat that we will be using in all of the buildings district-wide. So this just allows them to hit all of the dashboards and control panels, on the gear shifters, steering wheels, handles coming in, seat belts, connectors, things like that. And then we will also be using the same surface protectant every 30 days, which will add that additional layer of protection just to help repel against any types of germ, bacteria, or viruses from sticking to surfaces. Masks will be required on the bus at all times. We are asking that parents obviously ensure that their student has a mask prior to sending them to the bus. We don't want to run into a situation where a student may not have a mask, but if that is the case, we will have boxes of masks on every bus to provide that student. We just don't want to run into a situation where a parent sends a sick child to the bus stop and then the bus driver then has to worry about not letting that student on and then waiting there for a parent to come back and pick them up. And then now we have late runs going to the building. So that's why we're asking for that help from parents, just to ensure that they're screening their students on a daily basis before sending them onto the bus. We also do have sanitizers available. So when somebody enters a bus, there's a sanitizer dispenser right there. They would be able to use that, and then they would have their mask on at that point. We will be looking to seat from the back to the front just to avoid passing. So when students do enter those buses, they would be asked to go to the very back, and then they can work their way up to the front. To the extent that we can, we'll try to do one student per seat, but being that masks are required, there may be times, which is allowable under the county health department, where we do have 2 students in a seat, but obviously we'll try to stagger them to the extent that we can. So that's kind of.
Hey Dan, before you get off of that, similar question to the classroom question, and from a numbers standpoint on the bus routes. Granted, my son's in high school and we haven't been on a bus in a while, but just keep in mind those bus routes and how many students. Do you see a situation where we would have to do multiple routes or split up the routes? Or are we going to start all over with the bus route based on the number of students we're starting in with?
So as part of the commitment process, and as requested by our transportation department, we are going to ask parents to either commit or not commit to busing. That way we can ensure that we have adequate routes and staff in place to ensure, because there may be a bus that has a lot of kids and then a bus that doesn't have a lot of kids. And if we
that was
can
my concern.
reroute those buses, we certainly want to be able to. So we're looking at ensuring that parents do say they are going to take advantage of busing or not. That way we can plan accordingly.
Okay, and then the last one is for the buses themselves. So if a student shows up at the bus stop, they're getting on the bus. The bus drivers aren't playing,
Nope.
not playing that game. So if you show up at the bus stop, you're getting a. Are there any additional? Because I know the teachers on the teachers' desk, we talked about some plexiglass going up. Are the bus drivers asking for any additional protection on their side at all, or no?
We have discussed, leaving the first 2 rows behind the bus driver empty to the extent that we can. So if that's the case, then there's keeping that distance between them. We do have to be careful with like shields and things like that if they are driving, just because there's glare on the road.
Impairment,
and that kind of thing.
right?
So
Agree.
yeah.
Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah, but we are requesting when the students do get on that they use the sanitizer and that they have their mask, and then we will be sending them to the back up to the front.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep.
Question about the electrostatic fogger. Are there any studies as far as like the toxicity and affects people with compromised respiratory systems like asthma or anything like that?
That's beyond the scope of the school board.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, the sprayers are used primarily when nobody's in the building. So we're using those with products that are registered through the EPA as being approved disinfectants, and they're very safe disinfectants. There's no, I guess you could say, unregulated chemicals or anything in them. Everything has to be EPA approved that we're using.
All right. Thanks for that reminder, Sean. But thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
Dan, did I read someplace, I don't remember whether it was a commitment form or where it was, that we're going to be assigning seats on the bus to help with contact tracing? Or
so they're going to look at taking attendance on the bus. So when they have rosters for every bus based on the routes, the bus drivers would have a roster of who should be on that bus at all times. That way, if there is a student that tests positive, we would be requiring them to just keep track of which students are on which buses. That way, if we do have to contact trace, we're able to tell, okay, this student should be on this bus. Did they come to school today? And then we could contact the students that were on that same bus.
Yeah, and the other I guess just a suggestion, because my wife's employer, as did my employer, both went through the same issue. They had paper forms for staff to fill out at the door when they were entering a building, and they found out that people were congregating too much at the doors. So to effectuate that, one of our employers put together a survey monkey so that folks could do a survey monkey from their car. And the other did a Google form, and both of which also allow you to track compliance. And so, yeah, I don't know whether you were intending on doing paper, but if so, then there may be some low tech ways to get that done.
Yeah, we're looking at a Google form just to have both options available. So the majority may want to use the Google form at the building level, but if they had to do it by paper, we would still have those available as well. So we would have a QR code or something up at the front entrance that they could scan, or if they want to bookmark it, they could just simply pull it up every morning and just submit it. And then what we do is EnviroClean will take the forms that are filled out, but then I know at the building level, they might be able to run a report from that Google form just to share with EnviroClean so they know what rooms are being used.
Super.
I think the only other thing that I did not have on here that just came out more recently was the county health department guidelines on playground equipment. That is something that there was really no guidance on up until
Before you
this
jump to
point.
that, Dan, just a quick thing on transportation before we leave that topic is we sense that even though we're offering transportation, we bet that most people who are choosing in seat will probably want to drive their child. So we anticipate, even greater congestion in parking lots. So we've, as part of our planning, we've been anticipating, and in some cases we will be changing up on some of the parking lot routing of drop-offs, just because we anticipate that we'll probably have an increased number of folks being driven to school versus school bus. So we're working to remedy those potential issues as well. So go ahead, Dan, playgrounds.
Yeah, just briefly on this. So there really hasn't been any official guidance from the county health department with respect to playground equipment. The district protocol since the springtime has been, for a while we had shut them down so that nobody would be using them. And then it came out that you could use them, you would just have to clean them periodically. So that was kind of the district stance, was we were cleaning all of the more frequently touched points of the playground equipment with some sprayers outside after every use. But this is the guidance that has been formally released now from the county health department, which essentially says that just a normal cleaning routine is to be expected, but not necessarily disinfection. And they just say focused on cleaning plastic or metal and high touch surfaces such as grab bars and railings, things like that. So that'll be the protocol, is if we do have kids out at recess, we're obviously going to keep them as spaced out as we can out there. And it's, their guidelines say if they are within 6 feet, they would be required to wear a mask. So, and then any equipment out there would obviously have to be cleaned after every use. So that's something that, we have more of a formal policy from them now to guide us in this. But we also have been spraying each month the Surface Guard 90 on all of the playground equipment. And there's actual certificates that we've been tagging to the fences at all the playgrounds, which will show this playground equipment was treated on this date and it's good for 30 days. Just so the public or any staff that's out there, they can rest assured that this has been addressed with a surface protectant, and then obviously we'll have our normal cleaning procedures in place as well. So I think that's all I had really, just for the overall health and safety protocols. If the board has any questions, I'd be happy to address anything.
Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
So the other piece, so on top of all these processes and essentially reinventing every aspect of the district, is the staffing, which we talked about earlier in the board meeting about staff protocols. So how do we, what's the protocol by which we assign staff to whether they're in seat, whether they're remote. And as I mentioned, we've been working with legal counsel. We've also been working very closely in the development of this process with our AEA, our teacher union. They've been partners all along and have been great contributors to to this process. And so we've created a process by which essentially the highest risk medically staff will be chosen as the remote should they elect to be a remote. So there's an application process, and then there's a series of points that are given based upon the nature of that person's susceptibility or high riskness, whether it's they themselves, whether they are a caretaker of somebody who's high risk. We've taken into account many different scenarios that in order to protect and accommodate an employee. So with that, I will roll that out to Sharon. Again, I want to underscore that we had a great deal of collaboration on this process, and upon review of our legal team, it's seamless. We are bound by law to accommodate individuals who are high risk as an employee, and so this necessitates us getting documentation to verify that and to make those proper accommodations. So it is, I'll say, HIPAA compliant in regards to procedures and policies and so on. And this actually goes above the law in terms of accommodating for our most needy staff. So Sharon, if you would kind of take us through that process.
Okay. Good evening, Board of Education. I am extremely proud, I guess, of the relationship that we have formed with the AEA and the AVPE. We have met several times and really formed a collaborative partnership. So I am extremely grateful that we have that positive relationship. We worked together and we met on several occasions. And all of us came to the conclusion that we wanted to definitely provide preference to our teachers and peer professionals to apply for remote teaching, but we wanted to give preference to those that have health conditions that are identified by the CDC as being at an increased risk or perhaps at an increased risk. So we took those guidelines directly from the CDC. And we also then agreed that we wanted to give preference to our staff who are taking care of their loved ones, and they're the caregivers for their loved ones. And so that was our secondary priority for those that might be at risk and those that are at increased risk. So we put together a point value system, and I sent those out to all teachers as well as paraprofessionals last Friday. And then those are due back on the 16th. We are asking, and the AEA and the AVPE were in full agreement that we are asking for medical documentation because we really want to make sure that we ensure that we're giving priority to our staff that are at risk based on the CDC guidelines. And so we are asking for medical documentation. Dr. Schwartz was very helpful in getting legal counsel to make sure that we were following all of the guidelines because we are required to make sure that we're accommodating those based on the ADA. So that process is in place. Those are all due then back on the 16th. And then we have, we'll look at our parent requests. We'll look at our staff requests. We have 2 weeks then to get it in place. Our goal is then to make sure that we are able to let staff know 2 weeks in advance, as well as our parents a few weeks in advance so that we can all plan and prepare. My hope is, and my goal is that I can keep all staff members in their current building. I can't guarantee that. I realize the importance of that just because of the emotional needs of the students and the relationships that they've formed with their teachers. I'm going to do my best, but I can't guarantee that. That's the process that we're going to follow. And I can only say that it's been a positive relationship working with the unions, and I'm appreciative of their partnership. Do you have any questions that I can answer for you?
I know you mentioned a couple of the bargaining units specifically, but I assume that's because it's really HIPAA, we're talking about top to bottom. And I know in our transportation department, we have some tenured drivers, shall we say. You know, so that goes really across the board, doesn't it?
Definitely. And some of our transportation drivers are at an increased age, and some of them have already selected to take a leave of absence, and we've honored that.
Thanks.
So as we complete the process, you know, that's why all of these, I'll say all of these processes dovetail together at the same point. And that is that October 16th date, we get the finalities of the survey from parents on the commitment. We get the finalities on staffing with, you know, who's applications for remote. And then we begin the arduous process of now looking at what's the demand for in-seat versus remote. We have to pair up with teacher certifications because teachers can only teach certain things that they're certified in. So it's, you know, there's no one size fits all teacher. So we have to then go through the task of matching teacher certifications, student, whether they're remote, in seat, and then make those placements accordingly. So again, I can't stress enough that we need folks to make sure they complete those surveys. And that's why, coming back to your question, Mr. Down, you know, November 1st is cutting it really close to get that process completed and to communicate those placements, you know, by that date, because we're not even getting the survey data back until that 16th. And then obviously we have follow-up phone calls that we have to spend for people that didn't respond, and then, you know, go through that process. So that November 1st is tight. That's why that November 16th date works well. Also, it follows the end of the first card marking. So when we start on the 16th of November, that gets us into the new trimester, so to speak. So, so we're not coming back and having to blend, you know, the end of one trimester into the beginning of a new one. It becomes a marker for a new beginning at that point in time. So we have, in the surveys that went out on Friday, there was a family handbook that went out that encapsulated much of this information in a condensed version. And then likewise, we had a staff handbook that went out with their surveys on Friday as well that encapsulated a lot of this information. So we urge folks to kind of review those for reference. Also, all of this material is going to be on our website as well for folks to be able to access and review at their leisure as well. We do have the board meeting next Monday, in which we will continue on the topic of discussion, presentation, and then there will be a motion for approval of the proposal of these this incremental timeline that we've presented this evening, and the board then has the option to approve it, to amend it, or to delay it, whichever whichever the board decides to do at that point. Regardless of what the decision is, the processes that we've outlined remain the same in terms of garnering the staff input, the student input. So all of that procedural will remain the same. Again, the reason why we started with the surveying on last Friday is because if we're going back at this point in time in November, if this becomes the decision of the board, then we want to make sure we have ample time to prepare for that from a staff perspective and from a family perspective. So, so we've thrown, I'll say, a lot of information. We're going on almost 3 hours of information that we've thrown at people in regards to this discussion. Board, are there any questions from that you haven't answered or asked that we haven't answered yet?
Just a few things, not to delay the meeting any longer, but looking at the timeline. So, and I'm just verifying what I heard. So the meeting on the 12th, the special meeting on the 12th is when you'll provide the proposal and you're expecting the board to give a yay or a nay at that point on the proposal?
That is correct, because we do need to move if we're going to move.
My concern in asking that is because the survey results won't be back until the 16th, right?
Correct.
So we'll be asked to make a decision before the survey results are in.
Took my question, Mr. Johnson. Good job.
The survey results from the commitments?
Correct. That's a concern because I mean, that goes to, I think, a couple of questions that we've been asking in regards to what that critical mass is, how many students are coming back, what that overall plan looks like will, from a numbers standpoint, will be dictated by those surveys, which we won't have visibility of yet.
Yeah, but we'll have, I mean, we already have a good idea from the perceptual surveys that we sent out. I don't think reality is it's going to deviate much from the information that we've received.
Okay,
already.
I mean, agreed.
We'll have more. We'll have more of the undecideds decided.
I hope so. Yeah, but and the beauty of it, and as the board recognizes, the beauty of it, as Dr. Shore said, we can approve, deny, or delay it. I mean, that's the beauty of us being voting board members. But
it's incumbent upon us to be prepared, regardless of what you do. So if your decision is to approve it, we're ready. We're ready to go. So.
Okay. And the only other concern I have is, and I think I tipped my hat a little bit earlier, is the default further survey is in school. I just have, I know it's already published, it's out there, the survey's out there. I'm not looking for anything to be drawn back or anything like that, but my concern would be with the critical mass conversations we're having, with all the social distancing conversations and all the things that we're talking about trying to do very well. I guess I would have thought about the opposite effect of that. So we wouldn't have to necessarily deal with that many students in the building, if you will. But I'm okay with what's out there. It's out there. I just had some concern, not concern. I just questioned that a little bit.
Sure. And I can give you an update as to the number of, where the commitments are as of next Monday. I can tell you that survey's been out for 3 days. And as of the moment, there's 1,085 responses. So you'll have your number next Monday.
Yeah, sounds like it. Okay. Those are my only other points.
Yeah.
Great information tonight.
As Dr. Schwartz said, with the multifaceted approach, deliver the education in various ways, how much, like, the most is going to cost us extra in the delivery system, the most conservative number.
I didn't catch all of that, Sid. You're breaking up. Is it the cost you're asking about?
Yeah, the most conservative number, if you had the peak labor force to deliver education this way, it's like a 50-50 mix, I'd imagine would be it. So how much more is it going to cost the district if we realize the peak of both delivery systems?
Well, we don't have a specific number allocated to that yet, but we're trying to keep it within as much as within normal operation budget as possible. We do know we're going to have to put additional resources to some support staff potentially as folks are coming back, is because we have, as you heard, a lot of new protocols with isolation rooms and things like that are going to require additional time and additional staffing in those types of situations. Luckily, we have COVID dollars that have been afforded to the district federally that we'll be able to spend on that. So in terms of how much is really going to hit our general budget outside of what we've been allocated for COVID monies, we're hoping is going to be minimal. I don't know, Dan, if you have any different perspective on that, but we've been, as we've been looking at costs, we've been costing those out, looking at the influx of COVID monies that the school has received that have to be spent on COVID-related staffing or COVID-related protocols. And so we're trying to keep it where that's covering the basis without going into our normal operational funds.
Yeah, you anticipated my next question was the COVID-related dollars covered. So
Right.
appreciate that. Thank you.
Right. Well, and we just received an influx of dollars from Oakland County government, which has received CARES dollars for the county. And through the county commissioners, they have elected to give $28 million to the 28 school districts, essentially, in the county. And so they've come up with a formula to distribute those dollars. And so for Avondale, we're getting about $700,000 that will come to us as added CARES dollars, courtesy of the Oakland County government. So that's going to help us tremendously in absorbing additional costs.
Good to hear. Thank you. I guess election year pays off sometimes, doesn't it?
Yep. Yep. Other questions from the board? All right.
Good job, you guys.
Well, thank you. Well, it's been a ton of planning. I mean, it took us 3 hours to present the information. It probably took us about 3,000 hours to put it together.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
looks like it.
Yeah, nice work. Really nice work.
Yeah, well,
And
well
I know
thought out.
it,
It's well thought out, well presented. Thank you.
and I know it's a lot of work went into this in a short amount of time, and it's obvious well, my reality is, as I'm looking at this, is there's no kryptonite to this. There is no secret plan. There's not one idea that's going to work for everybody.
Right.
And I think based on the proposal that you have in front of us, at least we have a legitimate plan at this point. I may not agree with all the details of it, but that's the beauty of the situation, is that I can see the plan and I can understand the plan and the rationale for the plan. So I do appreciate that and all the work that went into it. We're doing what we think is, and I feel that in the plan. We are doing what we think is best for the students, and I really understand that.
So next week we'll continue the conversation. Kind of go. I'll have some more updated statistics for you, both from the survey perspective, the commitment surveys, as well as from the county COVID cases and kind of where that's trending. So I'll have that current updates for you.
Okay.